Hello everyone and welcome back to The Games Must Go On, a series that has absolutely no lore implications whatsoever. Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle is a game that came out back in 2017 and its obvious selling point is that you get to play as Mario with a gun! Now this of course comes with one obvious challenge, and that is why today I am asking, can you beat Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle while only using guns? The rules are simple, but they might not be what you would expect. For this run, I'm only going to be using the following moves. First of all, move. Unfortunately, there's no way to avoid moving in this game because the enemies can hide behind indestructible cover. Not to mention, there are missions where our only objective is to reach an area. Secondly, primary weapon. Obviously, in a gun-only run, using the gun is required. Third, well, nothing. While I could have allowed things like rocket launchers or hero sight, I decided that gun was powerful enough to not need these crutches. Also, I should mention that moving is basically the only thing allowed when moving. While I will allow myself to enter pipes and do pseudo-dashes, I will not be allowed to dash attack or team jump. With that, the only thing left to say is that extra health is banned and let's go! Our run begins in 1-1 with a fight that the game literally requires us to use gun-in with no substitutions. While the second fight gives us the options to move and dash attack, we are definitely not required to dash. Then in 1-2, both fights are pretty easy as our damage per second outclasses the Ziggies by a long shot, even with their dash attacks. In 1-3, we're introduced to Hoppers, which have almost twice the health as Ziggies, have more powerful shots than Ziggies, and can team jump. Needless to say, they're a little bit more annoying than your typical Ziggy, but they're still manageable. The second fight in 1-3 is also interesting because it's a reach area mission, which is more difficult than normal due to our phobia of team jumping. At the end of the day though, it is still in World 1, which means it's easy enough. In 1-4, the explosive covers let us get some good damage in, and the pipes allow us to flank the enemy. And 1-5 features our first mid-boss after an easy fight against some enemies at lower ground, meaning we do some extra damage. As for the mid-boss itself, well, it definitely does a good chunk of damage. By just piling on our damage from one side of a map, we can take it down in a couple of attempts. After beating the plant, we unlock 3 things, including new weapons, the skill tree, and Luigi. Obviously, the new weapons are pretty useful because they do extra damage, but Luigi and the skill tree are a little more subtle. Luigi, for instance, features the precision, which does more damage and range than your typical blaster, at the cost of Luigi's overall health. Also, Luigi's status effects include Ink and Bounce, Ink being vastly superior. Speaking of which, now is a good time to go over the status effects in the game. At the bottom of the tier list are Burn and Freeze, as Burn has the enemy run around randomly, possibly into a good spot or out of harm's way, and Freeze is also pretty useless because while it can prevent an enemy from using their special ability on their current turn, they can always just use it on their next turn. Honey is next because it stops enemies in their tracks, although they'll still probably be able to attack someone or at least look for cover to destroy. After that though, we have Push and Bounce, both being decently useful with Bounce being superior, as they can get enemies away from you as well as do some extra out of bounds damage. As for the high tier ability, we have Ink, which literally removes an enemy's ability to attack with their weapon. Granted, it doesn't stop movement damage from dash attacks, but considering it stops most enemies from dealing damage, it is definitely useful. Lastly are the best status effects in the entire game for us, Vamp and Stone. Vamp is simple enough. For every 2 damage we deal, we get 1 health point back. Now this is coincidentally our only way to heal in fights. As for Stone, it is the best ability in the game, as it prevents enemies from moving, attacking, or using special abilities. The only possible drawback for it is that if an enemy gets hit with any other status effect besides Vamp, it will be removed, but that's a small price to pay. So yeah, Luigi getting a new gun with ink is pretty good. Also, Mario gets a blaster with bounce and Rabbid Luigi gets a Bwarb with burn. All that's left now is the skill tree, which seems pretty useless at first considering most of the things to upgrade are just special abilities that we can't use. However, some skills to upgrade include health, movement range after entering a pipe, so not everything is worthless. Either way, with some new weapons, we easily take down 1-6, and the smashers in 1-7, which chase the player down whenever they're attacked. After that, 1-8's first and second fights went pretty well, but for the third fight I decided to go with a different approach than my typical brute force, that being pipe blocking. You see, you aren't allowed to stand on top of an exit square for a pipe. That being said, enemies aren't allowed to either, which means if there are no other tiles available, enemies cannot go through pipes. This means by standing on all the squares next to this exit tile, we can actually trap the enemies on the other side. Hence why the smashers can't get me right here. And with that, all that's left in World 1 is the boss, Rabbid Kong, who honestly goes down pretty easily if we just focus on the smaller enemies before focusing on them. World 2 is next, and it gives the enemies several upgrades. Ziggies get Hero Sight, Hoppers get a breakable shield along with a critical honey shot, and Smashers get the ability to boost surrounding enemies' power, as well as a critical bounce attack. However, I wouldn't say we're at a disadvantage because we unlock some new better weapons, such as Rabbid Peach getting a gun with push, and Rabbid Luigi getting a Bwarb with stone. With our new weapons, 2-1 goes down pretty easily, and 2-2 goes down after we brute force our way through the mosh pit of Ziggies. Next though, in 2-3, we're introduced to supporters, who use grenades which deal damage even when we're behind cover, and they also have a chance to critically burn us when we're not behind cover. Not to mention, they can heal themselves and their allies. The good news though is that 2-3 is still a pretty easy level even with the supporters and the Toad escort mission. 2-4 also goes pretty well before we start to fight against Blizzy and Sandy in 2-5, and I'll be honest, we get a little destroyed here, even with giving Rabbid Luigi a new weapon that uses Vamp. That isn't to say we're in the hottest of waters though, as by going back to World 1 we can clear the secret level for some more power orbs, as well as gold weapons with some good stats, particularly against mini-bosses. With some blinged out weapons, the mid-bosses go down without much of a fight, and we get our hands on Rabbid Mario, by far the best character in the game. Now Rabbid Mario is powerful in this run because of 3 things. For 1, his overall health and movement range are pretty good. For 2, he wields the Boom Shot, which is the only gun that can hit multiple targets. And for 3, his status effects are Stone and Vamp, same as Rabbid Luigi right now, which obviously are the best effects you could possibly ask for. Unfortunately for us, with the best character in the game added to our reserves, the worst enemy is added to the game, that being the Buckler, which uses the Boom Shot as well, have the critical effect of Honey, have a shield for portable cover, have an explosive Boom Dash, and of course have the ability to guarantee critical attacks for themselves and surrounding enemies. Yeah, needless to say, these guys are dangerous, as they can lock us in a place with Honey and then save themselves by using their shields. Even still, there aren't that many enemies in 2-6 and 2-7, so we can move on to 2-8, which features a ton of smashers and supporters in its first fight. While the combo of these enemies has the potential to do a lot of damage, by playing a game of Smasher Keep Away and getting rid of the supporters, the fight is definitely doable. As for the second fight, by spreading out and flanking the bucklers, they can be limited into only attacking a single character at a time, and they go down easily enough. Now on to the World 2 boss. While the Icicle Golem might seem tough at first, as long as you spread out to limit the boss's rocket blast to only hitting one player at a time, he actually isn't all that bad, and he goes down without too much of a hassle, meaning it's time to move on to World 3, or at least that's what I'd like to say. Unfortunately, while we can remove all the boss's HP, in order to actually finish the fight, we must dash attack the boss's head. Obviously, in this run, dash attacks are banned, but that begs the question, is this a dash attack? And my answer is actually no. Instead, I would like to classify this as a pseudo-dash. While in a lot of ways pseudo-dashes are similar to regular dash attacks, there are some key differences. One of these differences is that pseudo-dashes don't actually deal damage. As you can see, the boss doesn't have a health bar anymore, and when we collide with the boss, it doesn't actually take any points of damage. And another thing is that they don't trigger dash-related abilities like Rabbid Mario's Boom Dash. And because of these differences, I decided not to ban these pseudo-dashes like the regular ones. Now that we're on the World 3, I guess I should mention the fact that Peach joined our party in the last battle. While she does have a lot of health, overall she just acts as a worse version of Rabbid Mario, and her inferiority mostly comes from the fact that her status effects are Freeze and Burn, which are the worst in the game. Not to mention, she has some of the worst movement range as well. Even still though, she wields the Boom Shot, which gives her some versatility, especially when it comes to dealing a lot of damage fast. Also, now that we're in World 3, the enemies get some new status effects. For starters, Hoppers and Bucklers get Push, Smashers get Vamp, and Supporters get Freeze. Honestly, most of these status effects are downgrades from what the enemies had in World 2, however, I did conveniently leave out one enemy, that being the Ziggies, as in World 3 they get Ink, the worst attack to get hit by in this run as we can't use a cleansing jump to get it off. Well, at least we hopefully won't have to deal with a lot of Ziggies in World 3 anyway. 3-1 starts us off against a fight where our only goal is to kill 10 Ziggies. Obviously fighting fair here would be kinda dumb, so I recommend not doing that. Instead, I recommend staging all 3 characters on the wall behind where you start. While this will only give you a 50% cover, because the wall is indestructible, it gives us a stable base of operations along with a bottleneck for incoming Ziggies, because they want to stay behind cover themselves. While the strategy is no guarantee, it is definitely better than just facing the Ziggies head on. Next up in 3-2, we get introduced to Peekaboos, who can teleport, use the precision sniper rifle along with Vamp, and can use Magnet Dance to lure us to less than favorable positions. While Peekaboos definitely aren't the friendliest enemies, they are at least easy enough to take out with only guns, allowing us to take down 3-2, 3-3, and 3-4. But now that we're at the mid-boss, it's probably a good idea to go back to World 2 to grab some gold weapons. As for the secret level required to get the weapons, while the first fight is easy enough, the second fight requires us to be a little bit luckier as we need to take down Blizzy, Sandy, and some bucklers. And the only real strategy that I found is to take down Sandy and the supporter first, while staying back and trying to be spread out before dealing with the bucklers. Once they're gone, we can take down Blizzy, and once all the mid-bosses are gone, we get our hands on worthless secondary weapons. Hate to say it, but we don't get any new guns from the secret level in World 2. Well, at least we got some power orbs to make the World 3 mid-boss a little easier. As for 3-5, I recommend using Rabbid Luigi with Vamp and a character with a Boom Shot. While I used Peach for her higher health, Rabbid Mario is also a good choice. As for the fight, I recommend trying to use Vamp to drain as much health from the boss as possible and to not let up on your assault until the boss is dead. After defeating Calvera, we unlock Rabbid Yoshi, who wields the RNG Rattlebanger with Stone and Push, Stone obviously being the better option by a long shot. He also has some decent health and movement range. Here we also meet our last new enemy, that being the Valkyrie, who also wields the Rattlebanger, this time with Bounce. These guys also have the ability to protect allies from half damage as well as a ground pound whenever they team jump. Honestly though, these guys act more like souped up hoppers than anything, meaning as long as we up our game, they don't pose too much of a threat. That being said, we can take down 3-6, 3-7, and 3-8 without too much hindrance before moving on to Phantom. Due to the spotlights that we have to destroy, 6 more pseudo-dashes are required, but other than that, the fight goes pretty smoothly. I actually won it accidentally though, because in order to get to the last spotlight that was behind the Phantom, I actually got pushed off of the platform I was on by the boss, which put me right next to the last light. Other than that though, the Phantom is the easiest boss fight in the game and we get to move on to World 4. As you would expect, World 4 has us get some new weapons, but unfortunately not all the weapons are great. In particular, Rabbid Luigi goes from being a mage and a good way to heal to being the weakest Link that only uses push and burn. Other than Rabbid Luigi though, everyone else gets some stronger weapons. But there is a bigger issue at hand here, that being we've run out of useful things to upgrade in the skill tree, meaning we can no longer improve our stats without unlocking and buying new guns, which is a rare occurrence, especially this late in the game. Now's not the time to cry over spilled milk though, as we can still make it through 4-1 pretty easily. In 4-2 we can take some advantage of pipe blocking in the first fight and a sick pipe bounce in the second. But honestly, the biggest use of pipe blocking is in 4-3, where we can play the most intense game of Smasher Keeper way yet. Unfortunately though, we weren't as lucky in the second fight. At the beginning of this world, I never mentioned how the status effects were redistributed between the enemies, mostly because most enemies got pretty basic moves, like Ziggy's getting bounce and whatnot. However, one enemy got a whole lot worse, that being the Buckler. As if they weren't bad enough, in World 4 they get Ink. And remember, these are the enemies that can guarantee critical hits, meaning if they're close enough, they can remove our only way to attack, guaranteed. And in the second fight in 4-3, we have to get past 4 of them. I'll be honest, this fight actually gave me quite a bit of trouble. The only way I got past it was just by making a mad dash for the goal, trying not to get pushed back by peekaboos along the way. While it definitely took a lot of luck, eventually I removed the peekaboos from this plane of existence and just barely made it past the bucklers. You know, these bucklers were really annoying. I really hope the game doesn't send hordes of bucklers at me repeatedly for the rest of the game. I mean, that would be a shame. Well, at least we get a little break before the mid-boss, with 4-4 being pretty easy. Bad news though, the worst mechanic of the game gets introduced in 4-5. Now, typically in between fights there will be a little bit of ground to cover, maybe a dumb puzzle or something. But 4-5 says no to that, and instead has the mid-boss fight immediately after the first fight in the same arena. Now, this may not sound that bad, but it comes with a little consequence of the game not saving in between battles, meaning we have to make it through both battles without dying. But what are these battles exactly? Well, the first one is against 4 bucklers and a supporter. Because of course it is. Thankfully, there are some better cover options in this arena than in 4-3, and we can use the pipes to flank around the buckler's shields. Now as for the mini-boss, Mecha Jr. is actually incredibly cheesable. Because Mecha Jr. is essentially a smasher, we can lure him around the arena, and by luring him into a side pocket, we can then escape through a pipe to a different side to get out of his range. Rinse and repeat, and he's dead, and 4-5 goes down. With Mecha Jr. gone, we unlock Yoshi, who is essentially a better version of Rabbid Yoshi. While Yoshi only uses Ink and Freeze, he does have a high health cap, which makes him a little more useful. Next up in 4-6 though, we get to escort Spawny, which honestly goes pretty well. But then we reach 4-7. Now I'm gonna be honest, for the most part, besides a couple of hiccups in 3-1 and 4-3, I would say that this challenge hasn't been too difficult, with most levels falling after a couple of attempts. But in 4-7, we reached the difficulty curve, and bad news, it's going straight up. To start off 4-7, I should mention that for the second fight, we are going to need 2 characters with full health, and we're going to need Mario to have as much health as humanly possible. This makes the prime directive in the first fight to protect Mario at all costs. And, I mean, at least the enemies here aren't too bad. I mean, we have a couple of peekaboos, Valkyries, Smashers, oh, and 4 bucklers! Because of course there are! First things first, we have to escape from the buckler's range, because fighting them head-on would be like a rat heading into a KFC deep fryer. The good news though is that there is a pipe right next to us that allows us to do just that. Once we escape, I would recommend trying to take out all the enemies up here to try to give Mario a safe passage. Unfortunately, we will run out of room eventually because the bucklers will chase us, and if we try to turn around on the top or go back through the bottom, the bucklers will catch up to us and destroy us. While the situation may seem bleak, that's just because you haven't seen the ultimate cheese, manipulating the heck out of the enemy's AI. In order to save Mario, the first step is pretty simple. We need to sacrifice our teammates as they've outlived their usefulness. No, I'm not kidding. However, while we're sacrificing them, we might as well send them behind the bucklers to get a couple of shots in before they're completely annihilated. Then, we need to get Mario to the lower level, close to the ledge the bucklers will camp out on, but just out of range. By doing that, the buckler's brains have been surgically removed and the fight is as good as ours. Now you might be worried about the bucklers chasing after us, or trapping us in a pincer formation, or just using their shields to always have cover. However, funnily enough, you would be completely wrong. You see, bucklers typically want to control the battlefield, and as such will attempt to split us up by moving in between us. After that, they will then raise their shield in a direction that will defend against the most attacks. The developers missed one small issue though, that being they never considered that bucklers still count dead players in their calculations. And remember where our teammates are? That's right, on the other side of a map. Well, at least their corpses are. But that's good enough, as the bucklers will try to stay in between them and Mario, meaning they won't come off that ledge, and they will always face their shields towards the most enemies. And guess where the most enemies are? That's right, on the other side of a map, because I sacrificed both of my allies. That means they leave themselves open entirely to Mario, allowing free attacks and eventual victory. I do have some bad news now though. That was the easy fight, because now we have to fight against Wario, Waluigi, and a couple of Smashers and Valkyries. And this is definitely not good because the Valkyries and Smashers have great chemistry, with Valkyries being able to protect the Smashers and the Smashers being able to boost the power of the Valkyries. That's not even mentioning Wario has Hero Sight to complicate moving, and Waluigi uses Magnet Dance to control like half the arena. The only strategy I can really suggest for this fight is just to head straight for the bosses and pray for stone with Rabbids Mario. But with enough luck, I was eventually able to remove Wario and Waluigi from this plane of existence, and I just barely survived the remaining enemies. But with that, 4-7 is indeed complete. Now we're on to 4-8, which brings back a fun mechanic. Remember how in 4-5 we had to clear both fights in a single go? Well, in 4-8 we have one unique fight and then we have to clear 3 in a row. Yeah, because of this, if we go into the second through 4 fights with anything less than full health, we will basically be doomed from the start. So I recommend after the first round grabbing the mushroom before the next set of fights. Unfortunately, that wasn't a full heal. But who said it was the only way we can get health? While the game only wants me to grab the mushroom once, I personally disagree, and instead I quit the game, and by quitting and reloading, I can actually get another mushroom to respawn while keeping my current health, which allows me to repeatedly heal and get ready for the upcoming fight. To start off with the good news, it is pretty easy to get through the first phase damageless with Rabbids Mario's Stone as the ultimate attack. But that's where the good news ends, because phase 2 is up against 3 more bucklers and friends. The only real strategy I can recommend for this segment is to go to the right and try to hold the ground for 50% indestructible cover. While you're here, you can get Rabbids Mario to a spot to hit 2 of the 3 bucklers, which means you might be able to stun lock them with stone. If you can't, your castle will fall to a heavy siege. However, if you do get multiple stones and the other Rabbids are stupid enough to get in Rabbids Mario's range, it is actually possible to get past the phase. Now for the last phase, which is admittedly a little easier in enemy choice because it only has 1 buckler instead of 3. Of course, this comes with the downside of being required to rematch Wario and Waluigi and defeat the Lava Queen, not to mention we have to switch out our characters for the Yoshis from all the damage our team took so far. As for strategy, I would recommend trying to stay farther away from the enemies, but to still play aggressively, swooping in for kills when you can. Unfortunately, because of how many enemies there are, if you aren't lucky with rare crits from the Rattlebanger, you're good as dead. However, at one point I actually made it on a really good run, where I got several crits to stall Waluigi, as well as several crits with the Rattlebanger, which only has a 30% chance. And just like that, 4-8 was completed. Now at this point, I thought the worst of this challenge was over. I mean, all we have left is Bowser, who should just be another boss. Oh, how I wish I could end the video with that. Unfortunately, Bowser is by far the hardest fight in the entire game, so let's get into it. First off, a brief overview of Bowser's phases. Phase 1, Bowser will fly to your position and guarantee hit you before charging a hero sight. On his next turn, Bowser starts off with a Magnet Dance before striking the ground, hitting everyone in an area before doing a normal attack. For his next phase, Bowser gets a lot easier, as he just flies around, uses protection on all the enemies, and burns predetermined tiles for 20 damage. I guess I should mention that Bowser does have one little quirk, that being instead of using Lux, all of his attacks instead just guarantee crit, because that's fair. Finally, in his third phase, Bowser gets a little bit quirky and becomes a Beyblade. In order to attack him, you have to lure him into spinning into a block. If he hits one, he'll get stunned and become vulnerable to attacks for the current turn. This does destroy the block, putting the fight on a soft time limit, but it's better to have him destroy the cover than hit you, because if his attack succeeds, not only do you get rammed by essentially a truck, most likely into the void, but Bowser also does another attack at another player, which also destroys cover on collision. Overall, with 1600 health each phase, by far the hardest phase is the second one, where Bowser just attacks predetermined tiles. No, I'm not joking, and that's because we haven't talked about the other enemies in the fight. Now, the fight begins with 4 Valkyries, and it ends with 4 Smashers spawning in once we hit Phase 3. However, Phase 2, because of course it does, spawns in 4 Bucklers. Now, bucklers have always been a pain in this world. How could they not? But here, they are unmatched. In fact, in every other fight, we've had some level design to help deal with these foes. In 4-3, the bucklers were placed in a line, so we only had to deal with them one at a time. Not to mention, we just had to get past them, not actually take them out. In 4-5, the bucklers could be flanked with the pipes. In 4-7, the buckler's AI could be manipulated with the loop. And in 4-8, the bucklers were split between phases and we had cover to use for defense. In 4-9, there is nothing. The bucklers have every advantage in the book, and then some. For starters, while there are 11 blocks of indestructible cover, only 3 of them are usable due to Bowser's Pyroblast. Next, the bucklers spawn in a position that allows them to reach you no matter where you hide. But probably worst is, remember how I mentioned that Bowser uses Protect in this fight? Yeah, bucklers already take like 2 to 3 hits to kill, now they essentially have double health. So yeah, the bucklers are bad news, but to stand any chance, we first need to get through the first phase, so let's take a step back. Now, in terms of the characters to use in this fight, I tried a bunch of combinations. From Rabbid Mario to Peach, at one point I even considered using Rabbid Luigi with his World-Free Orb, just to get some health back with Vamp. In the end though, I had the best luck with Rabbid Mario with Stone and Yoshi with Ink. Now, let's talk about the first phase. The first priority is to stun lock and destroy the Valkyries. We can do this by first putting Mario in a very specific spot to bounce this one against a block like a basketball against a backboard. Next, we can put Rabbid Mario on the west side in a way that he hits literally everything. And lastly, we can attack with Yoshi just to get some extra damage and then put him behind cover. For Bowser's turn, he'll attack Mario because he's out in the open, and all we can do is pray that Mario runs away from Bowser when he gets burned, because after attacking, he activates Hero Sight, which basically prevents us from moving next turn unless we want to get burned again. Next attack, we start with Rabbid Mario, which, by the way, if he doesn't crit both the first and second turn, that's an automatic reset. With that though, we should be able to clear 2 of the Valkyries this turn, and Bowser will dispose of the other 2 with his Stomp attack. From here, the only strategy is just to wail on Bowser until he gets to his second phase. Now it's time for Pain. But before the bucklers actually spawn in, we should probably position ourselves in a way to hit the bucklers on the west side as hard as we can. And that's because the first turn the bucklers are alive, Bowser won't have a chance to use Protect on them, which means we can actually do full damage. After attacking, hide behind a west cover, and if you stoned with Rabbid Mario, you should be safe. Now if you didn't stone, sorry to say it, but you're getting inked. But from here, all I can say is stay defensive and hope for crits with Rabbid Mario. If you're lucky, you might be able to stun lock the bucklers and save some health. But then again, it all comes down to luck. One thing I will mention though is that if Rabbid Mario does crit, it might not be smart to attack with Mario, just because any crit besides Vamp on a stoned enemy will remove the stone, including Bounce, which Mario has pretty good odds of landing. If we are lucky enough to defeat all the bucklers, we are pretty much safe here for the rest of the phase, as long as we don't just walk into Bowser's Pyroblast, which means we can actually get into position to handle the third phase. Now, while I would love to use Vamp here to get a little help from Bowser, I guess I should quickly mention that all the bosses in this game are immune to status effects, so Vamp wouldn't really help. Now that we're in the third phase, let's talk about blocking, because now we just have melee enemies left. Well, as long as Bowser is always stunned. So we just have to be really careful about stunning Bowser every single turn, not necessarily always being directly behind cover. I say this because if we hide directly behind a cover, the smashers that spawn will be able to reach us. Instead, we want to hide out in the open in such a way that Bowser can't reach us without still ramming into a piece of cover. Calling this strategy consistent is kind of a stretch, as we have to worry about Bowser striking the smashers towards us, and sometimes Bowser's pathing navigation is just whack. There is one benefit to the smashers though, that being if they attack us while we're near Bowser, they will do some extra damage to him. Overall though, the main thing to remember is that Bowser is our only target, and the fight ends when he's dead, so focus all of your energy on attacking him and do not let up. This fight by far was the hardest in the game, but after 5 hours of attempts with 17 health remaining, Mario was finally able to finish off the run. So can you beat Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle while only using guns? Turns out the answer is yes. Well, as long as you don't count the pseudo-dashes in Worlds 2 and 3. But with that, I would like to give a huge thank you to Harry Mario and the legendary Kai for their support and donations. And I would like to say thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye!
Yeah, yeah, hi, here. Yeah, 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 yeah. Mamma mia. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Where? Yeah.